The observation deck floated in silence above Sanctuary Prime. Through the massive windows, stars stretched endlessly across the black canvas of space. Commander Velnath stood with his 4 hands clasped behind his back, watching the cadets gather in the simulation chamber below. His silver scales caught the light as he turned his head, all 4 eyes focusing on different aspects of the scene. This was his favorite part of the training cycle. The moment before the crucible began, when young officers from across the galaxy still believed they understood warfare. 3 days from now, they would know better. They always did. The Galactic Coalition Military Academy had trained warriors for 3,000 years. It orbited this neutral world precisely because no single species could claim advantage here. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, built by 12 different civilizations working together. Its halls had seen cadets from 200 worlds pass through its programs. Velnath had served here for 2 centuries. He had watched the best tactical minds in the galaxy face the Crucible simulation. None had completed it in less than 62 hours. That record belonged to a Threnian whose name was still spoken with reverence in the Academy halls. "They're ready to begin," said General Thorax, stepping up beside him. The Manthari general's exoskeleton clicked softly as he moved. His species had conquered their home system through careful planning and overwhelming force. They understood patience. "I've reviewed the team's standard composition this cycle." "Not entirely standard," Velnath replied. His voice carried harmonics that most species couldn't produce. "We have the humans." Thorax's mandibles twitched. "Ah, yes. The Deathworlders." Admiral Quentha drifted over to join them. Her species lived in water and wore special suits to interact with air breathers. Her tentacles moved in slow, graceful patterns as she spoke. "I've been reading the reports from Earth, a Class 12 death world. I didn't think any existed in this sector." "They were hidden," Velnath said, "behind a dust cloud in an unremarkable system." The survey team that found them was quite surprised. Below them, the 5 human cadets stood together in a small cluster. They looked so different from the other species present. No armored hides like the Cravaxians, no sensory stalks like the Lothrians, no crystalline skin like the Verdani, just soft flesh, simple eyes, and standard limbs. Day was the tallest of them, standing with straight posture and steady eyes. He had been designated as their team leader. Hyun stood beside him, shorter and more compact, constantly scanning their surroundings. Nari was reviewing something on her datapad, her fingers moving quickly. Suho and Jiwon stood slightly apart, talking quietly to each other. "They look fragile," Thorax observed. "I've seen their medical reports. Their bone density is adequate but not exceptional. Their muscle strength is average. Their sensory capabilities are limited to basic ranges. How did they survive on a Class 12 world?" "That's what interests me," Velnath said. "I want to see how they approach the Crucible." The betting pools among the Academy staff had been running for weeks. Most bet the humans wouldn't last past the first day. A few optimistic souls gave them until day 2. Nobody expected them to finish it all. The simulation chamber below activated. Holographic displays lit up around the room. The other cadet teams moved to their positions. There were 5 teams total, each representing different coalition species. The Cravaxian team moved in tight formation, their heavy bodies making the floor vibrate. The Lothrian team spread out, their long limbs giving them an advantage in scanning the area. The Threnians clustered together, already beginning their tactical calculations. The Verdani sought the spots with the best light exposure, and the humans just stood there waiting. The Academy's AI voice filled the chamber, explaining the exercise parameters. Each team would be dropped on a contested moon. They had to secure 3 objectives: a communications relay, a resource depot, and a command bunker. The moon had a thin atmosphere, radiation storms, automated defenses, and enemy patrols. Teams that lost all members would be disqualified. Standard time allowed, 72 hours. Velnath had seen this simulation run hundreds of times. Most teams took the first 6 hours just to establish a safe base camp. They would send scouts, gather intelligence, and plan their approach carefully. The successful teams usually captured 1 objective per day, sometimes 2 if they were exceptionally coordinated. The simulation began. The 5 teams materialized on the moon's surface in different locations. Immediately, 4 of the teams began behaving exactly as Velnath expected. The Cravaxians set up a defensive perimeter. The Lothrians sent out scouts in multiple directions. The Threnians began analyzing the terrain data and calculating optimal routes. The Verdani found shelter from the harsh radiation. Then Velnath's 4 eyes all focused on the human team. They were running, not jogging carefully while maintaining formation. Not advancing tactically from cover to cover, they were sprinting at full speed, and within 30 seconds of landing, they had split into two groups moving in different directions. What are they doing? Admiral Quentha's tentacles coiled in confusion. They haven't established a base. They haven't scouted. They haven't even assessed their equipment properly. Velnath zoomed the display in on the human team. Day was leading one group of three toward the communications relay. His movements were smooth and efficient. Hyun and Suho followed him, weapons ready, heads constantly moving to scan their surroundings. They communicated with hand signals that the Academy database didn't recognize. The other group, Nari and Jiwon, headed straight for the resource depot. They moved just as fast, covering ground at a pace that seemed reckless given the terrain. The moon's surface was covered in rocks and craters. One wrong step could mean a twisted ankle or worse. They're going to get themselves killed in the first hour, Thoric said. His voice carried certainty. They're violating every principle of tactical warfare. Velnath didn't respond. He was too focused on watching. Something about the humans' movements bothered him. They looked chaotic, but there was a pattern he couldn't quite identify. Their spacing maintained specific distances. Their routes, while seemingly random, actually provided mutual cover. Their speed was extreme, but they weren't panicking. This was deliberate. Day's group encountered the first enemy patrol. 3 simulated hostile soldiers appeared from behind a rock formation. Standard protocol dictated that the cadet team should take cover, assess the enemy strength, and plan an ambush or find an alternate route. The humans attacked immediately. Hyun moved in a way that made Velnath's scales ripple with alarm. He rolled sideways, came up firing, dropped back down, and rolled again. His shots were accurate despite the constant movement. Suho flanked right while Day provided covering fire. The engagement lasted 12 seconds. All 3 enemy soldiers were eliminated. The human team had taken no casualties. Replay that, Velnath ordered. The AI rewound the footage and played it again in slow motion. Velnath watched carefully. The humans moved like they had fought together for years, not weeks. Every action flowed into the next. When Hyun rolled, Day was already covering that direction. When Suho moved, he did so while his teammates' weapons were pointed at potential threats. They've trained extensively, Admiral Quentha said quietly. That level of coordination requires thousands of repetitions. But why train for such an aggressive approach? Thoric asked. They're taking unnecessary risks. What if there had been more enemies? What if the terrain had been different? Velnath pulled up the human team's biometric data. What he saw made his scales shift in alarm. Their heart rates were elevated significantly. Their stress hormones were flooding their systems. Their adrenaline levels were through the ceiling. By any coalition medical standard, they should be on the verge of panic-induced collapse. But they were functioning perfectly. On the display, Nari and Jiwon reached the resource depot. Without pausing, without checking for traps, they breached the entrance and swept inside. Automated defenses activated. Laser fire filled the small space. Jiwon took a glancing hit to the shoulder but didn't slow down. She eliminated the defense turret while Nari secured the objective control panel. Time elapsed. 8 minutes, 14 seconds. One objective secured. The observation deck was no longer filled with casual chatter. Everyone was staring at the displays. This wasn't how the Crucible worked. This wasn't how anyone fought. Day's group reached the communications relay. They didn't set up overwatch positions or establish a security perimeter. They assaulted the position directly, moving through the defensive positions like water flowing around rocks. 9 minutes, 41 seconds. Second objective secured. Both groups immediately turned toward the final objective, the command bunker. Velnath's hands gripped the railing in front of him. The command bunker was the hardest objective. It was supposed to take at least 12 hours of preparation. Teams needed to gather intelligence, stage supplies, and coordinate a complex assault. The humans gave it 90 seconds of observation, then they attacked. This is madness, Thoric whispered. But Velnath wasn't so sure. He watched the humans move with that same efficient chaos. He saw patterns in their madness. He saw something his 3,000 years of military tradition hadn't prepared him for. He saw warriors shaped by a world that didn't forgive hesitation. The command bunker sat in a crater surrounded by defensive positions. In previous simulations, it had taken teams an average of 18 hours to capture. The fastest assault had been 14 hours by a combined Kravaxian-Threnian team 3 years ago. That record was celebrated as a masterwork of tactical excellence. The humans reached the bunker perimeter at the 10-minute mark. Velnath watched as Day gathered his team behind a rock formation. For a brief moment, the commander thought the humans might finally slow down and plan properly, but the pause lasted only 90 seconds. In that time, they communicated entirely through hand signals, pointing at different positions and nodding. Then G1 stood up and started running directly at the bunker's main entrance. "No," Admiral Quentha breathed. Her tentacles went rigid. "That's suicide. The main approach has overlapping fields of fire from 4 defensive positions. She'll be eliminated in seconds." But G1 didn't run in a straight line. She moved in sharp, erratic zigzags. She dropped and rolled. She jumped over obstacles. She seemed to predict where the defensive fire would be before it happened. Laser bolts burned the air around her, close enough that Velnath could see the heat signatures on the thermal display. But none of them hit. She was bait. The realization hit Velnath like a physical blow. This small human was deliberately drawing fire from all defensive positions simultaneously. She was exposing herself to lethal danger to create an opening for her team, and it was working. While every automated turret and defensive position focused on G1, Hyun and Suho approached from 2 different angles. They moved low and fast, using the distraction to close distance. When they were in range, they struck with coordinated precision. 2 defensive positions went dark in seconds. Day and Nari hit the bunker from a 3rd direction. They reached a secondary entrance that the defenses had left partially exposed. Standard doctrine said this entrance would be trapped. It always was. Teams were supposed to spend hours disarming the traps or finding alternate routes. Day kicked the door open and threw something inside. A flash of light erupted from within. A flashbang grenade, Velnath realized. The humans had used their limited equipment to blind the interior sensors instead of carefully disarming them. They rushed inside. Velnath switched the display to show the bunker's interior. The hallways were narrow, filled with corners and choke points. Simulated enemy soldiers waited in defensive positions. Every entrance had overlapping lines of fire. The interior was designed to be a nightmare for attackers. The humans cleared it in 4 minutes. They moved through the corridors like they were choreographed. When Hyun came around a corner, Day was already covering him. When Suho entered a room, Nari was watching the hallway behind him. They flowed through the bunker like they could read each other's minds, but it was their speed that truly alarmed the observers. They didn't slow down at corners. They didn't carefully check each room. They burst through doorways and eliminated threats before those threats could react. It was what human military doctrine called violence of action, though none of the alien observers knew that term yet. General Thorix pulled up detailed combat footage. He played it frame by frame, studying every movement. "Look at this," he said, his voice tight. "When Hyun enters this room, he eliminates 3 targets in 0.6 seconds. The simulation's enemy reaction time is 0.8 seconds. He's moving faster than the program's designed response." "That shouldn't be possible," another observer said. A Lothrian admiral named Krenth stepped forward. "The simulation is calibrated for optimal response times across all coalition species. No one should be able to move faster than the enemies can react." "The humans are," Velnath said quietly. Inside the bunker, the human team reached the command center. This was the final objective, the hardest challenge. The command center had 4 entrances, all defended. Previous teams had spent hours coordinating simultaneous breaches or finding creative ways to cut power or introduce gas. The humans blew open all 4 doors at once and rushed in from every direction simultaneously. The simulated defenders didn't stand a chance. They were programmed to defend against careful, methodical attacks. They couldn't process an assault coming from 4 directions at full speed with no preliminary softening. 14 minutes, 37 seconds after the simulation began, the command center fell. The observation deck was completely silent. On the displays below, the 4 other cadet teams were still in their initial deployment phases. The Kravaxians had just finished establishing their base camp. The Lothrians were reviewing their scout reports. The Threnians were still calculating optimal approach vectors. The Verdani had found a suitable shelter and were preparing to move out, and the humans stood in the command center, breathing hard but victorious. The simulation ended. The holographic environment faded away. The 5 humans stood in the plain metal chamber, looking at each other with expressions that Velnath was learning to read. They weren't celebrating. They looked almost disappointed. "Something's wrong," Admiral Quentha said. "The simulation must have malfunctioned. Perhaps their equipment gave them an unfair advantage. We need to review the logs," but Velnath was already pulling up every piece of data. Equipment readings showed standard loadouts. No malfunctions. No advantages. The simulation had run perfectly within normal parameters. The humans had simply moved through it like it wasn't designed to stop them, because it wasn't designed to stop them. It was designed to test careful, risk-averse thinking over 3 days. The humans had approached it like a sprint, not a marathon. Run it again, General Thorix demanded. Different parameters. Increase the difficulty. Something went wrong. Velnath shook his head slowly. Nothing went wrong. They simply beat it. In 15 minutes? A simulation that takes 3 days. Thorix's mandibles clacked with agitation. That's not beating it. That's breaking it. Down in the chamber, the human cadets were being approached by Academy staff. Velnath activated the audio feed to hear what was being said. Please wait here, a Lothrian instructor told them. The generals want to review the simulation results. There may have been a technical issue. Day frowned. Did we do something wrong? We followed the objective parameters, Nari added. She still had her data pad out, scrolling through their performance metrics. Capture 3 objectives. Minimize casualties. We completed both requirements. Yes, but... The instructor seemed at a loss for words. You completed it very quickly. Is that a problem? Suho asked. He was checking the wound on his shoulder where the defensive turret had clipped him. The shot had burned through his uniform and left a mark on his skin. He prodded it gently and shrugged. Should we have gone slower? Jiwan looked confused. The simulation didn't have a minimum time requirement. We thought speed was an advantage. The instructor's sensory stalks drooped in confusion. Please just wait here. The generals will want to speak with you. Velnath watched this exchange with growing fascination. The humans genuinely didn't understand why their performance was causing such alarm. To them, this was apparently normal, standard, perhaps even cautious by their standards. What kind of world produced warriors who thought a 15-minute assault on a fortified position was reasonable? Admiral Quentha was reviewing the human biometric data again. Commander Velnath, you need to see this. She displayed the readings on the main screen. Heart rates that would indicate severe stress in most species. Hormone levels that suggested fight-or-flight responses. Neural activity that showed constant high-level alertness. By coalition medical standards, the humans had been operating in a state of extreme physiological stress for the entire simulation. They were functioning in this state? Krenth asked. Most species would experience cognitive impairment at these stress levels. Decision-making becomes erratic. Motor control deteriorates. The humans seemed fine, Velnath observed. Better than fine. They were performing with exceptional precision. Perhaps their species has different baseline readings, Thorix suggested. What if this is normal for them? Quentha pulled up comparative data from the humans' initial medical examinations when they first arrived at the academy. These readings are elevated from their baseline. Significantly so. They were definitely experiencing stress. But they functioned through it, Velnath said slowly. An idea was forming in his mind. A disturbing idea. What if stress doesn't impair them the way it impairs us? What if they evolve to function better under pressure? The observation deck fell silent again as this concept settled over them. A Class 12 Deathworld. A planet where the environment was constantly trying to kill everything on it. Where predators hunted. Where diseases spread. Where the weather itself could turn lethal without warning. What kind of species would survive there? What adaptations would they develop? Perhaps the ability to make quick decisions under extreme stress. Perhaps the ability to push through pain and fear. Perhaps the willingness to take risks that more cautious species would never consider. We need to understand this, Velnath said finally. Before we judge their performance, we need to understand what we're looking at. He turned to face the other generals. Summon them to the observation deck. We're going to ask these humans to explain exactly how they did what they just did. The 5 human cadets stood in the observation deck, surrounded by some of the most decorated military leaders in the galaxy. The contrast was stark. The generals represented centuries of experience, multiple species, and the accumulated tactical wisdom of galactic civilization. The humans were barely out of their adolescence by coalition standards, fresh from a world that had only just been discovered. Yet something in the air had shifted. The generals no longer looked at them with casual curiosity or mild concern. They looked at them the way scientists might study a completely new form of life. Commander Velnath gestured to the display showing the simulation replay. We would like you to explain your tactics. Walk us through your decision-making process. Day glanced at his teammates, then back at the assembled generals. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. We followed standard assault doctrine, sir. Speed, surprise, and overwhelming force at the point of contact. Standard for whom? General Thorix leaned forward. That approach violated every tactical principle taught at this academy. You split your forces immediately. You engaged enemies without reconnaissance. You assaulted fortified positions without preparation. These are not standard tactics. They're standard for human infantry doctrine, Hyun said. He spoke carefully, like he was trying to explain something obvious. When you have clear objectives and limited time, you move fast and hit hard. Every minute you spend planning is a minute the enemy uses to prepare. Admiral Quentha's tentacles coiled tighter. But you didn't have limited time. You had 3 days. Why not use that time to ensure success and minimize casualties? Nari pulled up her datapad showing their tactical analysis. We assessed the objectives during the briefing. The communications relay had light defenses. The resource depot had automated systems, but no heavy presence. The command bunker was the only serious challenge. We determined that with coordinated strikes we could secure all 3 objectives before any enemy reinforcements could respond. You made that assessment in the briefing? Velnath asked. You planned this entire operation before the simulation even began? Yes, sir, Day confirmed. We identified the key terrain, estimated enemy strength, and developed our approach. Once we hit the ground we just executed. A Lothrian admiral named Krenth stepped forward. But you couldn't have known the exact enemy positions or defensive layouts. How did you account for unknown variables? Suho answered this time. We didn't, sir. We adapted as we went. When we encountered situations that didn't match our expectations, we adjusted and kept moving. You adapted while under fire? Thorix's mandibles clicked rapidly. While experiencing combat stress? While your biometric readings showed extreme physiological strain? The humans exchanged glances. Jiwon spoke quietly. That's when adaptation matters most, sir. If you can only think clearly when you're safe and comfortable, you're not really ready for combat. This statement hung in the air like a challenge. Several generals shifted uncomfortably. The idea that one should make critical tactical decisions while under extreme stress went against everything coalition military doctrine taught. Leaders were supposed to remove themselves from immediate danger to think clearly and plan effectively. Velnath pulled up the footage of Jiwon's run toward the bunker. Explain this action. You exposed yourself to multiple defensive positions simultaneously. By any calculation, you should have been eliminated. Why did you do this? Jiwon looked at the replay, studying her own movements. Someone needed to draw fire so the others could advance. I'm the fastest runner on our team, and I'm good at evasive movement. It made sense for me to be the distraction. But you could have been killed, Quentha said softly. Yes, ma'am. But if I didn't do it, we'd all be stuck outside the bunker trying to figure out how to breach those defenses. The mission was more important than my safety. The observation deck fell silent. This wasn't bravado or recklessness. Jiwon spoke about her willingness to die for the mission like she was describing the weather. Calm, matter of fact, obvious. General Thorix pulled up Suho's medical data. You were hit by a defensive turret during the depot assault. The energy discharge should have caused significant pain and partial incapacitation, yet you continued fighting without any apparent impairment. How? Suho touched his shoulder where the wound had been. The simulation had been realistic enough to cause genuine discomfort. It hurt, sir, but it wasn't that bad. I could still move and shoot. The pain was manageable. Manageable, Krenth repeated slowly. Our medical staff reviewed the data. That level of energy discharge would have sent most coalition species into immediate shock. They would require medical evacuation and possibly emergency care. Suho looked uncomfortable, like he was worried he'd done something wrong. I'm sorry, sir.
Should I have stopped?
I thought I could keep going, so I did. This is what disturbs me, Velnath said quietly. He moved to stand directly in front of the human cadets. You're apologizing for not being injured badly enough. Do you understand how unusual that is? The humans looked at each other uncertainly. Velnath continued. Most species in the coalition evolved on what we call garden worlds. Planets where the environment is generally safe, where food is abundant, where the largest threats come from each other, not from the world itself. We developed intelligence to cooperate, to plan, to avoid unnecessary risk. Our military doctrines reflect this. We seek to minimize casualties and achieve objectives through careful planning. He gestured at the simulation replay. But you 5 operate on completely different principles. You seem to assume casualties are inevitable. You prioritize speed over safety. You make critical decisions while under extreme stress. And you do all of this like it's the most natural thing in the world. Day straightened slightly. Sir, with respect, on Earth we have a saying, the enemy gets a vote. You can plan perfectly, but once contact happens, everything changes. We train to make decisions quickly because hesitation gets you killed. Hesitation gets you killed, Thorix repeated. On your world, perhaps, but in civilized warfare, hesitation allows you to think, to plan, To preserve lives. Hesitation also lets the enemy prepare, Hyun said. His voice was respectful but firm. Every second we spent outside that bunker was a second they could call for reinforcements, strengthen defenses, or prepare countermeasures. We hit them fast because fast gave us the advantage. Quentha brought up new data on the displays. I've been reviewing Earth's history. Your species has been in a state of near-constant warfare for your entire recorded history. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, Nari confirmed quietly. We've fought wars on every continent in every era. Large wars, small wars, civil wars, world wars. Fighting is a significant part of our history. And your planet itself is dangerous, Krent added, reading from another file. Extreme weather events. Predatory animals. Poisonous plants, diseases. Your planet actively tries to kill you. That's a bit dramatic, sir, Ji-won said with a small smile. But yes, Earth is dangerous if you're not careful. Velnath's scales rippled. You smile when you say that. You describe a world of constant danger and you smile. Ji-won's smile faded slightly. I suppose it's because we don't think of it as unusual, sir. It's just Earth, it's home. Yes, there are dangerous animals. Yes, the weather can be extreme. Yes, you need to be careful. But that's just life. You learn to adapt. You learn to adapt, Velnath said softly. While we learn to avoid, he turned to face the other generals. Do you understand what we're seeing here? These humans aren't reckless. They're not ignoring danger. They simply have a completely different relationship with risk. They evolved in an environment where constant caution meant starvation, where hesitation meant death, where the only way to survive was to act decisively even when afraid. Admiral Quentha spoke carefully. You're saying they're biologically and culturally programmed for aggressive action. I'm saying they're adapted for a different kind of warfare than we are, Velnath replied. We fight to minimize losses. They fight to win quickly, even if it costs them. Not because they don't value life, but because in their experience, drawn-out conflicts cost more lives than swift, decisive action. Thorix accessed another file. I've been reading their training records. These 5 have been drilling close-quarters combat since they were children. They've run thousands of simulated battles. They've trained until their responses are automatic. Is this accurate? Yes, sir, Day confirmed. We train constantly. Repetition until muscle memory takes over. That way, when things get chaotic, we don't have to think. We just react. You don't have to think, Krenth said slowly. You're trained to act without thinking? Not without thinking, Nari corrected gently. We think constantly. But we're trained so that basic actions become automatic. How to move, how to shoot, how to communicate. That frees our minds to focus on tactics and strategy while our bodies handle the mechanics. Velnath nodded slowly. They've industrialized violence. Made it a science. While we view warfare as an unfortunate necessity to be conducted with maximum caution, they've refined it into an art form where speed and precision are paramount. He looked at the 5 humans standing before him. They seemed so young, so fragile, but he was beginning to understand that their fragility was deceptive. They didn't need thick hides or enhanced senses. Commander Park entered the observation deck 30 minutes later. She moved with the same quiet efficiency that Velnath had noticed in her cadets. Not rushed, but purposeful. Every step seemed calculated. Her uniform was neat, her posture perfect, her eyes constantly scanning even though she was in one of the safest places in the galaxy. She was older than the cadets, perhaps in her 40s by human reckoning. Her hair showed traces of gray and her face carried lines that spoke of experience. But she moved like someone half her age and her eyes held the same alert quality that Velnath had seen in the younger humans. Commanders, generals, admiral, she said, offering a crisp salute. Commander Park of the Earth Defense Force, you asked to see me? Velnath returned the gesture, though his forearms made it different. Thank you for coming. We need to understand what we just witnessed. Your cadets completed our 3-day battle simulation in less than 15 minutes. Park's expression didn't change. Did they complete the objectives? All of them, Thorix said. Perfectly. But their methods were highly unconventional. I see. Park clasped her hands behind her back. Are you concerned that they cheated? No, Velnath said quickly. We've reviewed all the data. They followed the rules. They simply approached the problem differently than we expected. We want to understand why. Park nodded slowly. She walked to the display showing the simulation replay. She watched it in silence for several minutes, her expression neutral. When it finished, she turned back to face the assembled generals. What you're seeing is standard human infantry doctrine, she said simply. Move fast, hit hard, overwhelm the enemy before they can respond. We call it violence of action. The idea is that aggression and speed can compensate for other disadvantages. But why is this your standard doctrine? Admiral Quintha asked. Every coalition species teaches careful, measured approaches to combat. Why do humans default to aggression? Park was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Have any of you reviewed Earth's classification as a death world? Class 12, Krenth said. Among the most dangerous planetary environments known to support intelligent life. Then you understand that Earth is hostile, Park continued. Not just to us. To everything. Our world has more predator species than any other planet in the coalition. We have weather systems that can kill entire populations. We have diseases that can wipe out civilizations. We have plants that are poisonous, animals that hunt in coordinated packs, insects that carry deadly pathogens. Even our oceans are full of creatures that can kill a human in seconds. She pulled up an image of Earth on the display. The blue and green world looked peaceful from space. Humans didn't start at the top of the food chain, Park said. We climbed there. We were prey animals for most of our evolution. We were hunted by cats larger than your Kravaxian warriors. We were killed by snakes, spiders, scorpions. We died from infections and minor wounds. We starved when we couldn't find food. We froze in winter and burned in summer. The generals listened in silence. So we adapted, Park continued. We learned to make tools. We learned to work together. We learned to hunt animals larger and stronger than us. But most importantly, we learned that hesitation means death. When a predator attacks, you don't have time to plan. You act or you die. This became part of our biology, part of our psychology. She zoomed in on the human brain in a medical display. Our brains produce chemicals when we're under stress. Adrenaline, cortisol. These hormones make us faster, stronger, more focused. What would paralyze your species with fear makes us sharper. We evolved to function better under pressure because pressure was constant. Velnath studied the chemical formulas displayed. So the stress we saw in their biometric readings actually improved their performance. In the short term, yes, Park confirmed. Obviously, chronic stress is harmful. But in combat situations lasting minutes or hours, those stress responses give us an edge. Our heart rate increases, delivering more oxygen to muscles and brain. Our perception of time slows, letting us process information faster. Our pain tolerance increases, letting us fight through injuries that would stop others. Suho continued fighting after being hit by the defensive turret, Thorik said. We thought he was being reckless. You're saying his body was designed to do that? Partially, Park said. But it's also training. We condition our people to push through pain, to keep fighting even when hurt. Because in real combat, being wounded doesn't mean you're safe. Sometimes it means you need to fight harder to survive. She pulled up training footage from Earth. The generals watched as human soldiers ran through obstacle courses while instructors shouted at them. They watched close-quarters combat drills where the participants moved with the same speed and precision they'd seen in the simulation. They watched training scenarios where soldiers were deliberately placed under stress, forced to make decisions while exhausted, hurt, and afraid. We drill until actions become automatic, Park explained. Thousands of repetitions. So when combat happens, muscle memory takes over. This frees the conscious mind to focus on tactics and strategy. Your cadets are taught to think carefully under calm conditions. Ours are taught to think clearly under chaos. Admiral Quintha's tentacles moved in slow, troubled patterns. This seems like a harsh way to train your young people. It is, Park agreed. We don't enjoy it. But Earth doesn't give us a choice. If we train gently, our soldiers die in real combat. Better to be hard in training than to fail when lives depend on it. You mentioned that humans were prey animals, Krenth said. But you became hunters. How? Park smiled slightly. Persistence. Humans might not be the fastest or strongest, but we're the best endurance runners on Earth. We can track prey for days. We can run them until they collapse from exhaustion. We call it persistence hunting. We simply refuse to give up. She gestured to her cadets still standing at attention nearby. That's what you saw in the simulation. Not recklessness. Persistence. They identified objectives and pursued them relentlessly. They didn't stop when faced with obstacles. They adapted and kept moving. It's not a conscious choice. It's how we're wired. General Thorax pulled up human military history on his display. The numbers made his mandibles click in distress. Your species has been in a state of warfare for your entire recorded history. Wars lasting years, decades, casualties in the millions. How do you sustain this level of conflict? We don't want to, Park said quietly. War is terrible. It destroys lives and civilizations, but we're good at it because our world forced us to be. Every generation of humans has faced threats. External threats from other groups. Internal threats from disease and famine. Environmental threats from the planet itself. We learned to fight because fighting was the price of survival. And now you're bringing that approach to the galaxy, Velnath said softly. Park met his gaze steadily. We're not here to conquer. We're here to learn and to contribute. Earth requested admission to the Coalition because we want to be part of something larger than ourselves. We want to share what we've learned and learn from others, but we can't pretend to be something we're not. We're products of our world. That world made us fighters. She walked over to the simulation display. Your Crucible simulation is excellent. It tests careful thinking, resource management, and long-term planning. These are valuable skills, but it's designed for species that evolved in safer environments, species that could afford to take time and minimize risk. And humans can't afford that, Krent said slowly. Couldn't, Park corrected. Past tense. On Earth, we couldn't afford it. Out here in the Coalition, maybe we can learn different approaches. Maybe we can become less aggressive, but that will take generations. For now, we are what we are, warriors from a world that didn't tolerate weakness. Velnath looked at the 5 young cadets. They stood quietly, listening to their commander explain their nature to aliens who had never faced the kind of world they came from. They looked tired now. The adrenaline from the simulation had worn off and the exhaustion was showing through. They were so young. And yet they'd been training for war since childhood. They'd been shaped by a culture that valued speed and decisiveness because hesitation meant death. They'd been conditioned to push through pain and fear because their world offered no other option. Commander Park, Velnath said carefully, what happens when humans don't face a threat? When the environment is safe and there's no need to fight? Park's smile was sad. We still fight. Sometimes each other. Sometimes we channel that drive into sports, competition, challenges. We're working on it. Learning to be peaceful is harder than learning to fight, but we're trying. Admiral Quentha spoke softly. You said you want to learn from us. What do you hope to learn? How to live without war, Park said simply. The Coalition has maintained peace for thousands of years. Conflicts are rare. Cooperation is the norm. That's alien to us. We've never known true, lasting peace.
We want to understand how you achieve it.
We want to become the kind of species that doesn't default to violence. But you'll always be capable of it, Thorix observed. Yes, Park agreed. We'll always have that capacity. Earth built it into our genes, but capacity and choice are different things. We can choose to be better than our instincts. That's what civilization means. 3 weeks had passed since the humans broke the Crucible simulation. The Galactic Coalition Military Academy continued its operations, but something fundamental had shifted. The change was subtle at first, like ripples spreading across still water. But those ripples were reaching farther than anyone had expected. Commander Velnath stood in his office, reviewing reports from across the academy. The documents piled up on his datapad, each one reflecting the same pattern. Instructors were questioning their methods. Cadets were asking new questions. The certainty that had guided Coalition military doctrine for 3,000 years was beginning to crack. The door chimed. Enter, Velnath said. General Thorix stepped inside. The Manthari general looked troubled, his exoskeleton shifting colors in ways that indicated deep thought. I've been reviewing historical battle reports, he said without preamble. From across Coalition history, I found something disturbing. He activated a display showing tactical maps from various conflicts. Look at these engagements. Coalition forces versus hostile species. In every case where the enemy used aggressive, fast-moving tactics, we struggled. Our casualties were higher. Our victories took longer. In some cases, we only won because we had overwhelming numerical superiority. Velnath studied the maps. He'd reviewed these same battles countless times over his career, but he'd never thought to analyze them this way. We always attributed those difficulties to the enemy being irrational, reckless. But what if they weren't reckless? Thorix asked. What if they were using the same doctrine the humans used? Trading careful planning for speed and surprise? And what if our doctrine, designed for conflicts between rational, risk-averse opponents, simply wasn't optimized for fighting aggressive enemies? Velnath's scales shifted uncomfortably. You're saying the Coalition's entire military framework has a weakness. I'm saying it has an assumption, Thorix corrected. We assume our enemies think like us, plan like us, value the same things we value. But the humans showed us that not everyone does. Some species, especially those from dangerous worlds, developed completely different approaches to warfare. Admiral Quentha entered the office, her tentacles moving in quick, agitated patterns. Have either of you been watching the other cadet teams? They're trying to copy the humans. She activated another display showing training footage. Kravaxian cadets were attempting to move faster, abandoning their traditional defensive formations. Lothrian scouts were taking more risks, pushing deeper into hostile territory. Even the methodical Thranians were experimenting with quicker decision cycles. They're doing it wrong, Quentha said. They're imitating the surface behaviors without understanding the foundation. The Kravaxians are getting hurt because their biology isn't designed for that kind of speed. The Lothrians are panicking under pressure because they're not trained to handle elevated stress levels. We can't just tell everyone to fight like humans, Velnath agreed. Their approach works for them because their entire biology, psychology, and training support it. Other species can't simply copy their tactics. But we should understand those tactics, Thorax insisted. Even if we can't use them ourselves, we should know they exist. We should prepare for enemies who might use similar approaches. We should understand when speed is more valuable than caution. A young Verdani lieutenant appeared in the doorway. Sirs, the War Studies Council is requesting your presence. They're discussing changes to the Academy curriculum. The three generals exchanged glances and made their way to the council chambers. The large room was filled with senior officers and civilian academics, all engaged in heated debate. The topic was clear: what to do about the humans. Professor Delthan, an elderly Thranian scholar, stood at the center of the chamber. For 3,000 years, this academy has taught one approach to warfare: careful analysis, minimal casualties, long-term planning. This approach has served the coalition well. But in 15 minutes, 5 human cadets demonstrated that sometimes careful planning is less effective than immediate action. So we abandon our entire military tradition? Challenged another professor. We throw away 3 millennia of accumulated wisdom because one team got lucky. They didn't get lucky, Velnath said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to him. I've reviewed every second of that simulation. I've interviewed the humans. I've studied their training methods and their history. What we witnessed wasn't luck. It was a completely different philosophical approach to warfare, shaped by a world that didn't allow for careful planning. He activated the main display, showing Earth rotating slowly. This planet is classified as Class 12 Deathworld. Do you understand what that means? Everything on this world is trying to survive in an environment of constant threat. The humans evolved as prey animals. They were hunted by creatures stronger and faster than them. They survived by becoming intelligent, adaptable, and persistent. The display shifted to show human military history. They've been fighting for their entire recorded history, not because they enjoy it, but because their world demanded it. They learned that hesitation means death, that sometimes the safest course is to act decisively even when afraid. This became part of their culture, part of their training. But we're not humans, Professor Delthan said quietly. We can't become them. No, Velnath agreed. But we can learn from them. We can understand that there are multiple valid approaches to warfare. We can adapt our training to account for enemies who might use human-style tactics. And we can recognize when speed is more valuable than caution. Admiral Quentha moved to the display. I propose we don't change our core doctrine. It works for us. It's based on our biology and our values. But we should add courses on alternative tactical approaches. Let cadets study human methods even if they can't fully implement them. Teach them to recognize when an enemy is using aggressive strategies and how to counter them. And we should adjust our simulations, Thorax added. The Crucible should remain a 3-day exercise for most species. But the parameters should account for the possibility of rapid completion. The simulation should scale difficulty based on approach. If a team moves fast, they face different challenges than teams that move slowly. The debate continued for hours. Some argued for wholesale changes to coalition military doctrine. Others insisted that the traditional approach should remain unchanged. Gradually, a compromise emerged. The Academy would maintain its core teachings but expand to include study of alternative warfare philosophies. The humans would be asked to teach courses on their methods. Other species would be invited to share their unique approaches. The goal wasn't to create one universal military doctrine, but to understand that many doctrines existed, each shaped by different worlds and different evolutionary pressures. That evening, Velnath found Commander Park and her cadets in one of the training rooms. They were running drills, moving through combat scenarios with the same speed and precision they'd shown in the Crucible. He watched for several minutes before Park noticed him and called a break. Commander Velnath, she said, walking over. How can I help you? I wanted to tell you that the Academy is making changes, he said. Because of your cadets. We're adding new courses. Expanding our understanding of warfare beyond coalition traditions. Park nodded slowly. I hope we haven't caused problems. You've caused a revolution, Velnath said. But a necessary one. For 3,000 years, we've taught warfare from one perspective. You've shown us there are others. He looked at the 5 young humans cooling down from their exercise. The Council wants to know if you would be willing to teach courses on human tactical doctrine. To share your methods with cadets from other species. Will it help them? Park asked carefully. Not in the way you might think, Velnath admitted. Most species can't fight like humans. Their biology won't allow it. But understanding how humans fight will help them recognize and counter similar strategies, if they encounter them. It will broaden their tactical thinking, make them more flexible. Park considered this. I'll discuss it with my command. If Earth agrees, I'd be honored to teach. Day approached, overhearing the conversation. Sir, can I ask a question? Of course, Velnath said. Did we really complete the simulation correctly? We've been worried that we did something wrong. Velnath's scales shifted to show colors of amusement. You completed it perfectly. You achieved all objectives with minimal casualties in record time. The problem wasn't your performance. The problem was that our simulation was designed with hidden assumptions about how warfare should be conducted. You assumed everyone would think like you, Nari said. Understanding dawning, exactly, Velnath confirmed. We designed the Crucible to test qualities we value. Careful planning, patience, risk management. But we never considered that some species might value different qualities. Speed, aggression, decisive action. You didn't break the simulation. You revealed its limitations. Jiwan smiled. So we're not in trouble? Far from it, Velnath said. You're becoming celebrities. Other cadets watch your simulation replay constantly. They're trying to understand how you did what you did. Can we show them? Hyun asked. Run the simulation again while others watch? Velnath's scales shifted again. The Council was hoping you would offer.